Hello everybody. Today we are going to talk about an American artist who loved to paint flowers. Her name was Georgia O'Keeffe. It is easy to remember her first name, Georgia, because we live in Georgia. Her last name is O'Keeffe. I always think of her in the spring when the flowers bloom, because she did many paintings of flowers. But her flower paintings were a bit different. She focused very closely on just the flower, not the vase or the stems or the leaves, like this painting by Van Gogh. Georgia O'Keeffe became famous in New York, where her husband Alfred Stieglitz encouraged her to show her paintings. He was a photographer, but she would always love the desert, in particular the beautiful landscape around New Mexico. Mrs. O'Keeffe moved to New Mexico and painted landscapes, enlarged flowers, and even dried bones that she found on her walks through the desert. She lived to be 99 years old. We're going to paint a flower in the style of Georgia O'Keeffe. So here's some nice daisies in my yard. I think I'm going to focus on these today. But just like Georgia O'Keeffe, rather than focus on the whole plant, I'm going to really try to zoom in and study just that flower. To draw my flower, I'm going to use a large piece of paper. This is 12 by 18 inches, but you can use a piece of paper that's half that size, say 8.5 by 11 also. I'm going to start with the center of the flower, and the center of my flower is a circle. Now I can put the circle right in the middle of the paper, but to make it an interesting composition, I'm going to move it off to the side just a little bit and make the circle of my flower. Remember, you're going to make it kind of large because we want the flower to fill the paper like Georgia O'Keeffe does. From the center, I'm going to put petals coming out in all directions, just like the sun. So I'm going to have flower petals that go off this way and go off this way, all the way around the flower. Try to keep them nice and straight, going straight out to the edge of the paper, not slanted or bent over. These will be shorter over here because the paper is shorter. But there we go, we've got our flower. Next step is to paint the flower. Now we could use watercolor paints. They just won't be quite as intense as other paints. For this project, I like to use tempera paints. These paints I got at School Box for $2 a bottle, and they have a variety of colors. I'm going to use those paints today for my flower. First step is to do the center of the flower. You can be as creative as you want to with your colors. Try to mix up some different colors. In the center, it's a circle, so I'm going to use brush strokes that are also a circle. Remember, we like to outline the shape first so we get nice clean edges and then paint it all in the middle. Then we can fill it all in nice and neat. I'm going to do another color on the petals, so I'm going to take a second to rinse out my brush and get all the blue paint out of my brush so it's nice and clean. I'm going to use yellow on my petals. Again, you can use any color you would like to. This time I'm going to paint the petals from the center all the way out to the edge of the paper. Make sure that your brush strokes go from the center out to the edge. This is the way that the petals grow, and a lot of times this is how the designs look on the petals. So we want them to all go from the center all the way out to the edge. Notice I put my paper on a piece of newspaper so that I can paint all the way to the edge and not worry about getting the paint on the table. And I'm going to go to the next petal and paint from the center out. And I'll go to the next petal and paint from the center out. All the way around the flower. Finally, I'm going to use a third color that's just a little bit different from my petals. And I'm going to use a tiny bit on the end of my brush. Notice I didn't even clean my brush this time. I'm just going to add a little bit of color from the center going out in the petals. Sometimes flowers have 2 or 3 different colors in there, and they just run the length of the petals. So I'm going to take a little bit of paint and just kind of stick it in there and have it blend with the wet paint that I've already put on those petals. Just a tiny bit in the center, moving out on each petal. See if you can try that. So from here, we're just going to let everything dry really good before we go on to the next step. The last step in our Georgia O'Keeffe flower is to add a little bit of oil pastel or crayon for some details in the flower. If you have a dark color, then put a light crayon on top of it. And if you have a light color, put a dark color on top of it so it really pops and shows. For example, here on this dark center of the flower, I'm going to draw some seeds. Because you know the seeds are all included in the center of the flower. And they will blow away in the wind and then plant in the ground to make more flowers and plants as they grow. I can use a darker color to outline some of these petals all the way around and really make a nice, big, colorful flower. Great job. Now here you can see how big those paintings are of Georgia O'Keeffe's and how beautiful the flowers are. Yours is too.